Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. This is your host, Paul F. Austin, and today we're exploring the intersection of neuroscience, music, and psychedelic medicine with Stephanie Karzon Abrams, whose journey perfectly embodies the convergence of science and soul in this third wave of psychedelics. So in our episode today, we dive deep into how psychedelics affect neural networks, explore the evolution of mental health treatment, and discuss the importance of bringing creativity and community into healing spaces. Stephanie is a neuropharmacologist with a master's in clinical pharmacology and is the founding advisor of Beyond Consulting, where she provides science, research, and strategy solutions to organizations in the psychedelic sector. Beyond her scientific work, she co-creates community initiatives, including the Public Secret music label and the Mount Mushmore Educational Dinner Series, while serving as a researcher for MDMA and psilocybin therapy through Canada's Special Access Program. So I've known Stephanie for just over 2.5 years now. She's been very involved with the Microdosing Collective, the 501c3 nonprofit that I helped to start a couple years back. And in our conversation together, Stephanie and I discuss how psychedelics uniquely impact brain network connectivity, her transition from corporate healthcare to psychedelic medicine, how to build a successful ketamine clinic or integrative healthcare center, microdosing applications for ADHD and anxiety, the vital role of lifestyle changes in psychedelic protocols, and finding balance between scientific rigor and creative expression. All right, that's it for now. Let's get into my conversation today with Stephanie Karzon Abrams. So I wanted to bring Steph on today to talk about what clinical psychopharmacology is exactly, because whenever you say that, I always do a bit of a head nod. What its application is to the psychedelic space in particular. But then also, kind of the first thing I wanted to dive into was the fact that you helped to run a record label and what got you into that. So let's start there. When did the record label come on the scene for you, and what's the sort of origin story behind that?
It's a good story. Started with my good friend Max, who moved to my neighborhood when we were 9 years old. So it goes back that far. And our friendship and our shared passion for music. So Max kind of started it. He moved to the Caribbean when he was 21 and started DJing and producing and throwing these events. The record label is called Public Secret. He threw a secret party on a beach called Public in St. Bart's, and Public Secret was born. So it was just events, and it was him kind of playing music. And then a few years later, he moved to Mexico, brought it with him there, and kind of started like an artist collective of sorts. And I traveled out there a few years ago and saw what he was doing, and I was inspired. I was inspired to, plant some roots for Public Secret in LA, because I thought, LA is such a hub for music and entertainment. So we did that. We incorporated as like a production and events business, and then it just took off. We were collaborating with a lot of artists that didn't have any kind of management. And so we started offering like artist development, strategy, and just kind of giving them like a home. And then the record label just came really organically after that. People started, asking us like, hey, do you have relationships with labels? We want to release our music. So Max and I were thinking, hey, people are always wanting to release music. It's really hard to get in with big labels. But since these artists are kind of, starting to mid-tier, why don't we give their music a home too? And so now we are several years later, and it's cool. We've got like 9 artists, and it's a collective. So everybody kind of helps each other out with different things: mixing, mastering, studio time, collaborations, production, remixes. It's a fun project. I get to flex my creative muscles and entrepreneurial, kind of brain. But I love mixing, in creativity with everything that I do. And you definitely have to get creative in this space.
How would you define the genre of Public Secret?
It's electronic music, but it's of the global groove, I would say. Lots of Afro influences, Latin. Cool. Definitely global groove. We've got people in Mexico. So like Max lives full time in Sayulita, and he runs all of our ops there. I'm here, and we've got everybody in between. We've got people in Canada, the Netherlands, Miami. So it's starting to really branch out. It's cool.
Yeah, when I lived in Miami, there was a group there, Tigre, which I think had like some really dope, like global groove, Afro beats, music. A couple of my dear friends
introduced me to Tigre.
Would go to shows at Tigre, and then we were hanging out a few months ago, and I remember you brought up Jungle, because Jungle also, I mean, they're quite big, but they have a similar sort of vibe, and that song Back on 74 has been on my liked playlist ever since
great.
then. So
last year they were performing at the Santa Barbara Bowl 2 days after our return from Burning Man. And I was like, can we do it? Can we do it? We didn't do it, but now forget about it. Like Santa Barbara Bowl is small for them.
Right, exactly. So they've really blown up in the last year and a half or so, right? So Jungle's great.
Yes, Jungle.
Public Secret is the record label. Now, what brought you out to California in the first place? Because you were born and raised in Montreal, and your lineage is Greek Egyptian, I believe. And yet, because you were born and raised in Montreal, I just naturally think of you as French. Or French Canadian. So tell us about your lineage. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and who you are, and how you made it out this way to Cali.
Yes, so born and raised in Montreal. My parents are Greek and Egyptian, but both actually are born in Egypt, but they met in Montreal. My mom came over when she was really young, and my dad came over later in his 30s. I don't know how they found each other, but it's pretty wild that they did. And it's interesting because a lot of my Greek family is actually from Egypt, and it makes for a really interesting like cultural background. Like we speak Greek, but even our Greek's a little different because the Egyptian Greek, it's not a different dialect or different language by any means, but I mean, we have Italian words that we use in our Greek. So that's just really fascinating. And my grandparents speak like 6 languages because they grew up in a hub in Egypt that was so multicultural. It was like a port city called Port Said. So there were Italians and Germans and, Spanish and all these different people coming through. And it was very vibrant. I've heard so many glorious stories about those days. So really, really rich cultural hub where they grew up, and I've visited, and it's really beautiful. I love going back to Egypt. I like going to Greece. There's like a sense of belonging, even though I didn't grow up there. You just kind of arrive and you're like, okay, my people,
Were they Coptic Christians?
So my dad is Greek Catholic, some sort of hybrid, and then my mom's Greek Orthodox, and they actually had trouble finding a priest that would marry them. Could you believe that?
Wow.
I know, wild. It's like pretty much the same. Like, do you believe in Jesus? Yes. Okay, here we go.
Slightly different rituals, probably different type of incense, right?
Yeah,
slightly
different
prayers.
incense, right? Different songs, pretty much the same songs, I bet. Yeah. So I grew up in Montreal, and like my whole life, I guess I was always kind of caught between the artist and the scientist. Yeah. That was just me. Like I didn't really know how to choose. I loved both, I guess, because of, like the lessons that your parents tell you to be practical. I was always going towards like science and medicine. But there was a brief moment, in Montreal, we end high school at grade 11, and then we've got 2 prep years before we go to university, and undergrad is 3 years. So in the end, it's the same as the States. It's just kind of divided differently. So in those 2 prep years, you choose a concentration, and I was going to do health sciences. And right before I graduated, I had met a friend of mine, who really encouraged me to pursue writing because I love to write. And I would send him things that I was writing. And he was like, "You're really good. You should go into liberal arts." And somehow he convinced me. My parents were thrilled. No, they weren't. They negotiated with me. They were like, "Okay, you can do liberal arts as long as you do math." And I was like, all right. So I did a year of liberal arts, and it was awesome. Like we studied the classics, we had epic writing teachers, and it was a really cool program. But naturally, I changed my mind again, and I flipped back to science. Yeah. And then the same pattern kind of happened in college. I started in speech language pathology with a concentration in neuropsychology. So I was starting to head in the direction that I'm in now. But there were some twists and turns. And then after that, I was like, no, actually, I want to do pharmacy. So then I switched to pharmacy, and then I stayed. And then I got my master's in clinical pharmacology. But it was always this like push, pull, like I love music. I love writing. I feel like I have this like artist soul, but I love science. Like I really do. I think science is so cool. So anyways, all this to say that, fast forward to now, I get to do a little bit of everything, which is cool. I've been writing a lot too. So that's great. I get to flex that muscle. But before I went into corporate, you mentioned med tech. Before I went into corporate, I did a few years in the ICU with the pharmacy team. Our focus was brain injuries. And that is kind of the origin story of how I ended up in, psychedelic science and plant medicine. Back then, I was I was struck by how these patients were managed long-term. It was just like mental health drugs forever. And they weren't really ever coming back to themselves. When you have a head injury, you have a lot of psychological changes and some pretty massive personality changes that could also happen. And, it's just mental health meds to manage these like functional symptoms. That's what we call them after the acute phase of the head injury. And I was like, how can this be it? Like, how is this it? And when, conversations started percolating again about psychedelics and the research, I started to think, I wonder if these tools could be the answer for people with head injuries long term. So that was the light bulb moment for me. I had spent in between these moments, I had spent 6 years at Johnson & Johnson at Biosense Webster, which is a medical device company, and learned a lot about healthcare entrepreneurship and, engaging different types of, physicians and helping to grow their practice and all the strategy around that. So I figured there was like some sort of like combination of everything that I had done so far that I could essentially put together and use to further my career in plant medicine and psychedelics. But I do have to say that meeting the Microdosing collective was the first thing, the first opportunity that I had. And I'm really grateful because you guys as a group really empowered me to just go for it. You said, all right, like, do you have ideas? And let's make them happen. And then you introduced me to Evan, and then I started working with Evan. And Evan's a neurologist. He's also the medical advisor for the collective. So him and I, started brainstorming ideas, and we published a paper on spinal cord injuries and psychedelics. And we've got a ton more ideas of things we want to do. But those two first introductions, you guys and Evan, were a big deal for me. That's really what catapulted everything. And then everything was just like a big snowball of opportunities after that.
And how did you meet Allie? So Allie was probably your doorway into the Microdosing collective, Courtney Barnes.
Courtney, but it's, when they say right place, right time. So not last April, April 2022, I had just left J&J in January 2022. One of the artists on the Public Secret label, we were just getting to know each other. He was a new artist that I'd just been introduced to, and he was going to play a gig on Maui. And he said, do you want to come with me? Kind of just see what I do. Let's see if we could work together. It was kind of just like, let's feel each other out and see if this would be a fit. And I was like, cool. Yeah, I'm fun employed right now. So let's do it. So I followed him to Maui. And then we had like a beach day one day, and some of his friends from Maui came out, and I was talking to this guy, and he was asking me, like, what are you going to do next? And I told him what I wanted to do next. I said, I'm really looking to meet people in psychedelics and plant medicine. And he said, oh yeah, I'm going to introduce you to my friend Courtney Barnes. And then I called Courtney when I came back from Maui, and I told her about all my hopes and dreams. And then Courtney introduced me to Allie. And then the rest was history. Right place, right time.
Right place, right time.
Follow your heart, kids.
Thank God to Maui. That's beautiful. So let's kind of get into it then. What is clinical psychopharmacology? How would you define that? I abbreviate it to neuropharm, but it's the study of drugs and the brain. It's the relationship between drugs and the brain. Obviously, with the focus on neuro and psych, you end up focusing on mental health. You end up focusing on neurological disorders from, brain injuries, spine injuries, MS,
that sort of thing. I was really focused on traumatic brain injuries. And then naturally, because of what happens after a brain injury, all of the mental health implications, I got a pretty good introduction to psychology and psychiatry. And the traditional pharmacologists are behind a lab bench. They're in a lab, they're working with, compounds and whatnot, and they're doing formulations, or they're synthesizing sometimes, and they're working with chemists sometimes. Other pharmacologists do research, and then some of them consult, specifically within pharmacology. So I actually never did any of that. I did research, but I wasn't really interested in being in a lab. So I just figured I would take my, deep understanding of the brain, of psychology, and of all of the different, pharmaceuticals and advise. That's what I wanted to kind of like use those skills to just like support and advise. And at first, when I kind of moved away from J&J, I started advising like plant medicine brands, people who had products, whether they were like functional mushrooms or functional plants, Kana, the likes of those, like the new age supplements. I would get calls like, oh, I want to formulate, something new. Can I mix these two together? What would the contraindications be? Or they would just pick my brain about what plants they should focus on. Pick my brains. Pick my brain. One brain.
You have multiple brains, Steph. We all have multiple brains,
I do. But yeah, they'd pick my brain about, what plants they should look at for what. And I'd get a lot of those calls. And then I would start getting calls about tapering. I want to get off this and I want to do this instead. And from an educational standpoint, I would be able to provide information. And then it just kind of grew into research, getting research commissioned. Yeah. And
I want to get into that because that'll sort of bring us back to the Microdosing Collective, but I think save that for a little bit after, because there's one more project that you run that I think is super interesting. And just for the listeners who are tuning into this, we're laying out the whole playing field of what Steph has been navigating between, Public Secret and her background in Neuropharm, and now, Mount Mushmore, which was a really cool project that you kicked off a few years ago in LA. I went to a couple of the dinners. You had a co-collaborator on that, Joey. Tell us a little bit about the intention behind Mount Mushmore and what those events and experiences were like. Why did you do them?
So Joey and I met in Venice. We met at a party. I don't know how we got to talking about mushrooms, but we did. And I was transitioning out of J&J and kind of looking for the next thing. And I was really passionate about just like the fungi space. And so was he. So we thought, why don't we bring people together to just commune over this growing conversation? Because it's like, everyone has a mushroom chocolate. Everyone's got a question about mushrooms. It's a popular topic. And when we started it, it felt like it was kind of really starting to percolate around the west side of LA. And we were both living there at that time. So we started this dinner series to bring people together, people who were curious, who had, no role in the industry, all the way to people who have dedicated, their entire lives to mushrooms. And so it wasn't just psychedelic mushrooms, it was functional, and it was also culinary. So we wanted to provide like a full education and a full experience. Could even like highlight certain entrepreneurs who wanted to introduce themselves and their product or their brand or their service to the community. And we would get a chef to create a really beautiful dinner using mushrooms that you don't typically find at the grocery store. So the education would kind of expand in that way and touch upon all these different aspects of like the fungi world. So that's what we were doing, and we're still doing them. We haven't done one in a little while. The last one we did actually was commissioned by Mudwater, and that was really fun. In their new space in Santa Monica, Gather. It's interesting because one, I felt like coming out of the pandemic, people were really seeking community. And so it was a great opportunity to bring people together, and people were down. Like they wanted to get together. And the educational piece, I think, was also a big part of it. And sometimes the dinners were more sophisticated and high end. Like we did one for the Grays, Alex Gray and Allison Gray in LA last October. And we did like a full sit down meal with, waiters. It was 5 courses, super awesome. But then we'll also do family style. I think you came to one that was more family style, and there was like a cooking demonstration.
I think I went to two different ones. One was on Abbot Kinney at the house there. That was the first one that I went to, and that was a little bit more, I think, family style, and there may have been a cooking demonstration. And then I went to the one that was like, it was also in Venice, but in sort of this back alley. Not to sound sketchy, because it wasn't sketchy, but it was like this cool little place that also it was like a pop-up is kind of what it felt like.
Okay, that one is the one that I was thinking of when I was thinking of the cooking demonstration. Did you come to the one on Abbot Kinney in the big house?
Yeah.
Yes. That one was fun.
That was fun.
Yeah, different locations. We did one in Denver last year during the MAPS conference. Mm-hmm. That was great as well. We had this really cool elixir bar provided by Function, George and Phoebe. Function. So we had Kana and lion's mane and other elixirs that had functional ingredients. And that's when we noticed that, we always kind of served some wine, some natural wines. We never had hard liquor, but we were like, okay, these functional elixir bars, people are digging them. Like they're buzzing off of these, psychoactive plants. And we didn't have anything psychedelic. It was all legal plants and mushrooms that also were psychoactive at times. And we started integrating these elixir bars moving forward because we thought it just weaves perfectly into the plant education piece. And it fits really well with the culinary experience. So we started to make them non-alc, which was great.
Steph, my sense is this could also be done really well with psychedelic compounds even. Like I remember years ago when I was spending a lot of time in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, I stayed with this gentleman, Jules, and he had helped to develop like a cookbook, a recipe book, essentially, that was a book with all these different recipes that you can make with cannabis, or you can make with psilocybin mushrooms, or you can make with, I think there was stuff around Syrian rue or whatever it is. So I do feel like there's sort of this opportunity, right, to like even have microdoses or lower doses that are weaved in. What you were doing through Mount Mushmore was fantastic, but there were no psychedelic components necessarily, just to clarify.
No. And it's definitely an option. Have to explore how to strategically pull that off. But yeah, of course, we've thought about it for sure.
And you could do it in a state like Colorado legally, right? Because there's also like a legal consideration, although a lot of these Mount Mushmore events have been more, if you know, and invite only sort of vibe. I feel like there would be such a cool opportunity, and there is such a cool opportunity to weave those two worlds together, because psychedelics connect us and food connects us, right? Sitting down for a meal with friends or family is basically the oldest ritual that we have for real deep connections. So it'd be cool if mushrooms could be woven into that as well.
Totally. I like what you just said. People really do enjoy coming together, and there is such a feeling of bonding when you sit down and break bread with others.
And the name Mount Mushmore is kind of fun too. Okay. So neuropsychopharmacology, neuropharm, right? Background in med tech, worked at Johnson & Johnson. You've now been in the psychedelic space for about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about just energetically, like vibe wise, what is the difference between working at a company like J&J or working in big pharmaceutical companies versus being more involved in sort of these psychedelic underground artistic groups and communities? Like, how has it been for you to make that leap and that shift almost back? Because I feel like how you were raised and being in Montreal was probably similar to where you are now compared to kind of big corporate life.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's pieces like pieces that remind me of Montreal, because Montreal is so... Have you been before? Yeah.
A few times.
It's like food, hospitality, music, entertainment. It's like the beating heart of Montreal, and it's so multicultural, and you hear many languages, and those are the pieces that I love the most about Montreal. And I feel that since I've transitioned to this field of work, I get to kind of have more of those like flavors in my life, I think. Not just because my career is a bit kind of diverse in terms of disciplines, but I'm traveling a lot more. I'm meeting so many more people. It's just, I feel like culturally I've like re-diversified in a way, whereas before when I was at J&J, it was very one track. And I was very focused in one area. Like for most of that time at J&J, I wasn't doing public secret. And I had almost also, if I recall, I wasn't really writing anymore. I wasn't playing music or making music. So I felt like it was a little bit narrow for me. And I was missing a lot of things. And I remember when I came to LA, the world really cracked open for me because I was witnessing people doing a lot of different things and being good at doing a lot of different things. And it was inspiring. And it was also a light bulb moment because it reignited my desire to be involved in more than one thing. I mean, I've always been very like athletic, playing sports. I was a CrossFit competitor at one point, and when I came to LA, I joined Paradiso CrossFit, which was quite a competitive CrossFit gym. And I became quite competitive in the sport. And I mean, like traveled to do competitions locally and in the US. And that was kind of it. It was just like work at J&J and CrossFit. And it was cool. Like two things are great. It was awesome. But I wanted more. I wanted to bring the arts back into my life. So now I feel a little more, actually, no, I feel a lot more complete. But the other thing about this work and life now is I feel that I really enjoy the West Coast way of working. The work culture here, Montreal's a little different. It's like a Euro city in North America, but it's still got East Coast work vibes and work culture. And I think that living in LA and doing this work has mellowed me out a lot more. I had a lot of that like New York edge. I still have a lot of it, a little bit of it, but I used to have a lot more. And I feel like, it's mellowed. California has mellowed me out. I came to California with J&J. They recruited me after 1 year of working in Montreal because the headquarters is actually in Irvine. And I came out a couple times to do some trainings and met some people, and we got along, and they brought me out a year later. And it's fantastic. Like it was a no-brainer. I was like, come to California? Of course. And it's funny because when I was younger, I loved California. I had a thing with California. I had never been here before, but I had such a thing with surf culture and California culture. And so it's interesting that I ended up here. But I think that the work I'm doing now is very much aligned with who I am. And it has allowed me to just bridge diverse passions and bring them into my life the way that I was intended to. And so I feel quite, complete being able to spend time in the arts and then, play music and collaborate with others on music and write. So that whole, artist soul is satisfied. And then I get to put my scientist hat on, during other moments and use my strategy brain and entrepreneurial spirit as well. So it's nice. It's a nice blend on a day-to-day basis.
And so let's talk a little bit about what you're actively doing with Beyond Consulting. Who is it that you're supporting? How is it that you're supporting them? What role do you think that psychopharmacology has in the psychedelic space in particular? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, what you study in school is just a piece. It's just a small piece. It teaches you how to think a certain way, and you can definitely lean 100% in and just do that, or you can take the pieces that serve you best and then apply them wherever you want. So for me, the neuropharmacology is a great foundation for the clinical piece of psychedelics, being able to have a research role. So I still have a research role, and leaning on, that education is helpful because because then I am able to do research, and then I am able to lead with a certain level of like clinical acumen. And I think that in this space and the type of clients that I work with, it's very valuable to have that understanding. And then on the flip side, having the corporate experience from J&J is really helpful as well, because I get to then do ops and strategy and business development, and I could, flex those muscles as well. And at J&J, I had a clinical role. I was in the hospital almost every single day, but that clinical role was also a strategic one. So it's very similar. But it's just like a different application. So what we offer are research and science solutions, first and foremost. So when we work with plant brands, plant medicine brands, natural supplements, there's a lot of questions about the pharmacology of these plant products. There's questions about formulations. So I'm able to consult on those projects because of my background. And then a lot of the times, in a saturated market right now, everybody has a lion's mane supplement. Everyone's got a Kana supplement. There's just, the market is becoming saturated. So how do you stand apart from everyone else? And I think that there's a couple ways. So research is a great way to stand apart. And research is fantastic because you can use that as marketing strategy, and you can build trust with consumers. And in a murky supplement market where you can print things on a label that aren't necessarily true, right? Like we hear about how murky the supplement industry is. It's great to be transparent and lead with that transparency. So if you design a research project to demonstrate safety, efficacy, whatever you really want to demonstrate, you're being transparent and open with your consumers, and you're contributing to research at the same time. And you can use all that data, whether it's a publication, whether it's something a little less formal, you can use all of that data for marketing and for educating the consumer population. So those are the main offerings for the plant brands. And with organizations in the psychedelic space, nonprofits, biotechs, clinics and wellness centers, I've actually assisted 3 clinics now with getting up off the ground. I just finished a clinic project about a month ago here in Burbank in LA. And it's an integrative medicine clinic with a focus on mental health. So there is ketamine-assisted therapy, but we also work with integrative medicine doctors, and they offer some really beautiful East meets West medical treatments. And what's really interesting about this clinic, I don't think that there's anything like it at this point. Everybody goes through a consultation with the physician, and then you get these comprehensive care plans that could be multi-service, from acupuncture to nutrition services, IV supplements. If you need mental health support, there's therapists, there's ketamine-assisted therapy, but it's not like a med spa where you can just pick and choose. Of course, if you say, hey, next Tuesday, I'd like to come in for some acupuncture, no problem. But pretty much everyone has gone through the process of meeting with a physician so that there's a really good understanding of what that person's needs are. And then they're very much held and guided through the whole process. So it's very high touch. So I'm really proud of that project, and looking forward to doing more of these types of centers in wellness or integrative medicine, mental health. But that has been kind of a new thing over the past year and a half, I'd say, that I started supporting. And that was never on my radar. I never thought I would be doing this type of work. But at the same time at J&J, I would help physicians scale their practices. We called it market development, therapy awareness. And so I've kind of relied on the skills that I honed at J&J with that to do this.
And what are some of the biggest challenges, especially for like ketamine clinics? And, what do they have to navigate if someone's listening to this and like, oh, I've considered at some point potentially opening a clinic, like what are some things to be mindful of, to be aware of? What are some challenges that have to be navigated as part of that?
I think clinics, you can just be a ketamine clinic, right? And you can just offer ketamine as your main service and you can be successful, but it's not enough to just open your doors and say, we're a ketamine clinic and we're here. You have to do a lot more to educate people, and And I think there's a lot of strategy that goes behind acquiring patients. And it's not just marketing. I think the education piece is huge. I think partnerships with other providers. I think a lot of providers who open clinics underestimate how important partnerships are, because yeah, you can do direct to patient type of marketing and outreach, but you want to educate the provider community. You want the family medicine physicians to know about you and trust you and send patients there. You want other psychologists who don't offer, psychedelics or ketamine to know that you're there as well. So you want to create these partnerships. And then the other thing I think that's really important is just like the ethical protocols that you're putting together. So it's not just about, okay, this is the dose of ketamine that's safe for a human being. I'm going to inject it and then that's it. Like the preparation, the integration, the personalized protocols, being able to take your patient through a protocol, have them graduate the protocol, and then figure out what the next step is really important. What are your patient's anchors outside of the clinic? So there's just like a lot of these things that you have to think about that will make your practice not only successful in business, but then be successful like in the hearts of your patients, because like your patient's success is your success. So I feel that you have to do the most if you're going to open a practice like this, because it's not just opening a psychology practice where you're doing talk therapy. There's so much more involved. And my advice is often to offer other services. Why just stop with mental health is not just the therapy and the medicine. There's more that you can offer people. People are complex. There's a whole person there. So that was kind of my idea with modern medicine services. This last clinic that I helped out with was, let's make it multi-service. Let's offer more. And I think it was a good idea.
So let's talk a little bit more about the neuropharmacology of conventional psychiatric medications versus psychedelics. Especially considering some of the more recent research that's been published. Why is it that psychedelics are such a major shift and phase change from what pharmaceutical companies have been offering for the last 40 years? What is it about them from a psychopharmacological perspective that's so fascinating and interesting?
Did you read that paper that psilocybin desynchronizes the human brain?
Which was this a recent paper? Or?
Yeah, like maybe a couple months ago.
I may have come across it.
Yeah. It was the one that it had like the pictures of the fMRI and like it was all lit up, like the whole brain was lit up. And at the same time, there was some sort of article. It was like, this is your brain on drugs, but it was like a positive message. Right. It wasn't holes in your brain. It was like, look at all these parts of your brain that are lit up and active and connecting. So just like, without getting like too deep in the neuropharm and just nitty gritty, at the end of the day, I think what's one of the most important pieces here is that it desynchronizes the human brain. And what does that mean? It's that in your regular day-to-day and like the default, mode of your brain, there's order, and you have certain networks that are activated at a certain time, depending on what you're doing. But then when you consume something like psilocybin, the barriers between these networks dissolve. And now the networks are talking to each other. And they're talking to each other in a way and communicating in a way that they don't usually do. And, if you just say it like that, you're like, well, that's alarming. But no, that is exactly what leads to the problem solving and the creativity and the feeling of openness and the emotional sensitivity and the revisiting of memories and the integration of those memories. And it's allowing your brain to go to a higher level of functioning. And that is essentially why a lot of people are finding success using psychedelics to support them, especially when traditional meds haven't been working for them. So this other paper also that came out was a comparison between psilocybin and Ritalin. And that one is incredible. In my experience, and maybe,
What did
I'd
that
love to
paper
hear.
say? Because I didn't come across that paper. I didn't have a chance to
I'll
read
send
that
it to
paper.
you, and you should link it in the show notes. I wrote a summary as well, so it's a little bit more digestible. But that paper essentially said that when you take Ritalin, so people who have ADHD, they need the stimulation, right, of their dopamine pathways. It's like what we call a paradoxal phenomenon, I guess, or mechanism, right? So like you'd think like, oh, people are overstimulated, you need to sedate them, but it's actually the other way around. You need to stimulate them in a different way so that they can hone in and focus and be less distracted. But the problem is that it kind of shuts down the communication with other parts of the brain. So the creative thinking and problem solving is actually attenuated. And although it feels like you can focus on the task at hand, you're kind of like dimming down all of the other processes. Whereas when you take the psilocybin, you are able to focus, you're able to get into a flow, but also all these other areas of your brain are firing. And so it's actually optimizing you. And it's very fascinating. They show you imagery as well, and you can actually see and visualize the results of this study. So not to say that everyone should like ditch their ADHD meds and go for psilocybin, but yeah, maybe they should. I know it's controversial to maybe say it like that, but I think that there could be a lot more people that are helped if they're prescribed psilocybin in this way. And the
or
research
LSD
is
even, because
or LSD.
I do think LSD, it's more dopaminergic. And I've noticed people who have been on Adderall and Ritalin for a long time find that LSD is a little bit more stimulating, so it can help with that
And
transition.
you need less too, because it stays in there a little
way
longer.
less of it because it stays in much longer. And I do think, for me, I mean, I love LSD, but also these plant medicines. My favorite, like I microdose San Pedro today, and I love San Pedro as a microdose because it has some of the same stimulating and focal impacts that LSD has, but it's not too stimulating, right? Or it's not too heady. Like there is sort of a rooting and a body kind of fill with it as well.
Yeah, you gotta kind of find what works for you and experiment a little bit. But I do agree. I think we are going to see that LSD for headaches. So the LSD is there's gonna be a lot with LSD for sure. In your experience, this has been mine, but in your experience, I'm curious. Like, have you seen that most people who are successful with microdosing psilocybin are those who have general anxiety and ADHD, or just microdosing in general? Because that's what I'm finding people have reported to me.
I mean, what I've noticed time and time again is if someone's in a depressive state, especially if it's a more temporary depressive state, that low doses of psychedelics can help them get back to sort of normal baseline functioning pretty quick. What I found to be the case with ADD, ADHD, it really depends on the individual. Because even though psychedelics are helpful, the rush isn't the same as with Adderall or Ritalin. So there is a bit of I do think some level of coaching is required.
Oh, for sure.
Or helpful if someone is looking to transition from ADHD medications into more lower dose psychedelic work. And partly it's helpful to know how to calibrate it and what dose to take that's appropriate, but even more so the sort of psychological dependency on that rush. It's like you have to really train yourself to also meditate and do breath work and figure out other lifestyle like shifts and other lifestyle patterns that support a more sort of centered lens of perspective. Anxiety, I find, can be hit or miss, and again, I think anxiety is something that requires a certain level of support, whether it's therapeutic or coaching. It's interesting what MindMed has found with their LSD for generalized anxiety disorder, that even at a dose of 100 micrograms, it's incredibly effective for generalized anxiety disorder. I think the challenge sometimes with these microdoses or these low doses is when people who are anxious take them, it can temporarily make those people maybe slightly more anxious.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be some support provided as part of that, because my read on what's happening is there's sort of a rebalancing happening where you kind of got to get the anxiety out, right? So many people try to address anxiety by just calming down, but usually too much anxiety is a reaction to too much internal energy. So it's like people with high levels of anxiety, like working out, sauna, cold plunges, lots of movement.
You got to regulate the nervous system.
You got to figure out how to regulate the nervous system, right? I mean, it's also why I love the Apollo and why I wear the Apollo all the time, because that's something that when consistently worn 3 hours a day, significantly helps people who have
Wait, tell me about the
anxiety.
Apollo. What is that?
The Apollo Neuro is a wearable device. It uses the vibration of sound. We've had Dave Rabin on the podcast a couple times. Dave's the founder of that. And it has an app, and you utilize the app, and it just, you can feel, if you're feeling tired, it'll help you awake. If you want to wind down at night, it'll help you wind down at night. It'll help you focus. You can turn it to a meditative state. And, I've noticed when I wear it consistently, I'm just way more regulated. I'm way more calm. I'm way more balanced. The thing that I say about it is it's sort of like wearing a microdose on your wrist. It's just got a really nice, it's essentially using haptics, right?
Yeah.
So vibration to just kind of calm and regulate the nervous system. And it just feels really good.
I'm going to look into this. That's really interesting. I get a lot of people who talk to me about getting off of anxiety meds, low dose SSRIs, and ADHD medication, and figuring out some sort of protocol to support them. And like you said, every time I tell them, it's not just about replacing your meds with another medicine, even if it is plant-based. What does your lifestyle look like? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis to regulate your nervous system? And journaling is something that I always recommend to people. And it hasn't failed. Just integrating that as a practice, it hasn't failed. Everybody has told me that it just has helped them so much. So I think that that's always something to keep in mind. It's not just about replacing one thing with another. You have to look at everything, because it is a lifestyle change. Even with macro doses of psychedelics, okay, cool. You just sat with 5 grams of psilocybin today. What does today look like? What does tomorrow look like? But what does the next 12 months look like? If you're going to do this again, what is life going to look like? What is the perspective change? What is the change within you? Even if it's small, like, what is it? So I think that's an important message that also carries over to microdosing, whether you're doing it, for a psychological reason, whether you're doing it for, optimization and overall wellness. I think there's a lot to think about in terms of your intention and what is the change that's going to carry over day after day? Yeah,
you got to shift the external structure. That's what I always say. Like, yes, it is an internal game, and yes, there's a lot of work that can be done on our internal sort of sense of self and psyche and capacity. But at the end of the day, it's what do you do with it, and how do you make changes in your external environment that are going to be more supportive of a healthy, way of life and way of living.
Yeah, you took a little break from calls and emails not too long ago.
Yeah. I took a little bit of a sabbatical because I was so overwhelmed and overrun. And I probably shared this with you when we were together last time. It was like I was getting sick consistently and couldn't figure out what was causing that. And so finally I got some really good advice end of July, and I haven't gotten sick in like 3.5 months now. So I figured my way out, but I had to make some intentional changes, even if they were temporary, to allow for that to happen. Or else I would have been stuck in the same pattern, which was like I was getting quite sick every 6 weeks, which is not fun. Don't recommend it.
Yeah, that's definitely a little bit of a red flag, right?
Huge red flag.
Hello. Yeah. That's something, because when I saw I had sent you an email a while ago, it was a few months ago, and I saw that. I was like, gosh, I'm like, that's a smart thing to do every once in a while. And not just like I'm going on vacation, so here's my vacation responder. It's like, no, I'm still here, but I'm taking a break. It's hard, especially when you run your own business. It's hard to just, turn everything off because you run your own business and things need to keep going. I think you asked me about what are some things that I've noticed in, I guess, this like different phase of my career. And I'm still learning how to manage calls and emails and people expecting responses and schedules. And we were talking about doing podcasts, and it's a lot of energy. you're having these intentional conversations. It's a lot of energy, and you have to block off time in your day. And it's not like you just like snap back to just going to do the next thing. And so I'm still finding my groove. I love this work structure. Like I really, really do, but it's not always easy. And you feel pressure sometimes to do the most and to say yes to opportunities. And yeah, you need to check yourself pretty often and say like, should I say no to this? Should I take a break? Should I not look at my email for 24 hours? And yeah, so that's a whole nervous system regulation thing too.
Yeah, just resting. That's sometimes the best medicine.
Yeah.
Which we don't do enough. We're not bored enough. We're not resting enough. And I speak for myself in that way as well. Even a lot of the breaks that I've taken over the last few years have been, I'll take breaks, but I'll go do a 10-day Vipassana or go do a 10-day dieta, or, I rarely just sit on a beach and read a book. I mean, sometimes during my day, like I'll go spend an hour or two at the beach, but I'm talking for days at a time because I just don't like to be bored.
Yeah, I'm the same.
At the end of the day, right?
I'm the
same.
same.
I like stimulation. I like activity, but if it gets to be too much, I just feel a little like burnt out and overextended.
Yeah.
Well, Steph, this was great. Thank you for pivoting. And we were going to do this in person in Venice. I'm hosting a dinner tonight. We ended up doing it virtually. So I appreciate you pivoting. I know if folks want to learn more about what you're up to, if they're interested in, the work that you're up to, whether that's with ketamine clinics or with product formulation, I believe it's at the URL is still beyondthebench.life. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Beyondthebench.life or beyondconsulting.life. They lead to the same place. I'm figuring out how to merge those right now. But we can link those for the community. Thanks so much for having me on. As always, it's fun to talk to you. I feel like we could we've got the gift of the gab, you and I feel like we could just keep going.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I see you published something even about psilocybin desynchronizing.
There it is.
The human brain on beyondconsulting.life. So we'll link to beyondconsulting.life. Check out some of what Steph has published about functional connectivity and the special effects of psilocybin on functional connectivity. There's some really good stuff here. And if you're interested in opening a clinic or, formulating a product, reach out to Steph. She can help.
Yeah, thank you. And if you want to check out the music label, publicsecretmusic.com.
publicsecretmusic.com.
Yeah, so if you are a provider, any kind of clinician looking to open a center, reach out if you need any support. If you are a plant medicine brand and have a product that you want to differentiate and elevate, contribute to research, reach out as well. And got a good team, skilled team going.
Yes, you do. Thank you so much, Steph.
Thank you
for coming on. I had a lot of fun. Hey listeners, Paul here. I hope you enjoyed our episode today with Stephanie Karzon Abrams. Her unique perspective on bridging neuroscience with creative expression offers valuable insights for anyone interested in the future of psychedelic healthcare. A quick reminder to head to the link in the description of this episode to see the full show notes and any of the links that we mentioned. And you can also check out Stephanie's work at beyondconsulting.life. Make sure to follow the Psychedelic Podcast wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode inspiring or helpful, please consider sharing it with a friend. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to grow your own medicine for microdosing or high-dose experiences, check out our Mushroom Grow Kit. It's the simplest way to get a reliable source of high-quality mushrooms, and it includes detailed videos walking you through the entire process. No guessing, just clear instructions for best results. Check out the link in the description below.